I've dwelled by this very same waterway my entire existence. For 3 generations, its waters have been a constant presence, a voice in my family's life. Yet that particular night, it remained eerily silent, only to erupt with unimaginable fury. By the time dawn broke, the downstream homeowners association was submerged. By midday, their representatives were on my porch, demanding $2,800,000. Fortunately, my trail camera captured a far different narrative. When you spend enough decades living alongside a river, you begin to grasp its essence. Much like others understand intricate machinery or spirited horses, Red Willow Creek, while not imposing in size or volume, possesses a remarkable steadfastness. It's one of those ancient, unhurried watercourses that has meandered through this valley since long before Wyoming had paved thoroughfares or street markers. My father often remarked that it had a distinct character. My grandfather insisted it held memories. And after all these years, I'm inclined to believe he was right. I grew up alongside it. I learned to fish in its depths. I learned to hold it in high regard. And the foremost lesson a Wyoming creek imparts is this: it does not belong to you. You belong to the land, and the land bestows the creek upon you. That's the fundamental agreement, and it has always been so. Most mornings I'm awake before the sun even contemplates its ascent. I prepare a cup of coffee so potent it could rouse the departed. Then I lean against the fence post and simply listen. People from the city often mistake Wyoming for a place of silence, failing to recognize what truly warrants attention. Out here, quietude is merely another facet of being alive. It's the rustling of leaves in the cottonwoods, the shifting of cattle hooves, the whispering brush alive with unseen creatures, and beneath it all, the creek, ever present and patient, patiently abrading stone, a ritual it has observed since time immemorial. However, this past spring, a subtle shift occurred. It wasn't overtly alarming, nor was it a dramatic premonition, but rather an unsettling discordance that only someone who has inhabited the same soil for over half a century could perceive. The atmosphere felt heavy, the air carried a metallic tang, and even the avian chorus seemed out of sync, vocalizing at hours uncharacteristic for them. The storms arrived with military precision, one after another, amassing above the ridge. Rain didn't fall so much as it descended in torrents, sheets of water relentlessly striking the earth, transforming the fields into dark, glossy expanses. Yet I harbored no undue apprehension. I had witnessed that creek swell, I had seen its anger, and I had seen it subside with equal rapidity. It always maintained its own cadence, a rhythm I trusted as implicitly as some men trust their machinery. Nevertheless, I followed my established routine. I traversed the northern pasture, inspected the culverts, cleared debris from the drainage ditches, and reinforced the ancient stone spillway my grandfather had meticulously constructed long before the concept of HOAs or exclusive communities in the valley had ever taken root. Life on a ranch doesn't reward wishful thinking. It rewards foresight and preparedness. The livestock were my initial indicators of unease. Cattle are not easily startled, at least not mine, but on those nights they repeatedly lifted their heads as if apprehending sounds beyond my auditory range. Their ears twitched towards the hills, their bodies shifted restlessly, an undeniable disquiet pervading the entire herd. Then came the night that irrevocably altered everything. It was nearing midnight, the rain hammering down with relentless force. There was no wind, only the heavens emptying themselves onto the land. I was seated in my rocking chair, the very one my father had fashioned with his own hands, observing the storm and letting my thoughts drift aimlessly. It was at that precise moment the world fractured. A sharp, violent detonation reverberated through the valley, so profound that the window panes rattled. It was a sound of immense power, a force I felt resonating within my very ribs, and I swear that sound was alien to the natural world. Thunder rolls, it rumbles, it travels. But this struck like a solid entity yielding under immense pressure, like rock fracturing, like the very earth being rent asunder. I stood transfixed, peering into the darkness, anticipating another such occurrence. However, the tempest seemed to absorb it whole, leaving behind only the percussive roar of the rain and the amplified voice of the creek. I recall murmuring, "That was not natural." Yet, lacking any alternative designation, I filed the sensation away in the recesses of my mind, much as ranchers do with inexplicable phenomena requiring further comprehension. If only I had possessed the foresight to grasp the true nature of that sound. If only I had understood the ramifications it would precipitate, the ensuing legal battles, the fabrications, the animosity of neighbors, the court proceedings, perhaps I would have donned my coat and ventured forth to ascertain its origin. But I did not. I merely listened to the rain, observed the creek's swelling current, and awaited the arrival of morning. A warning had been issued, yet I had not yet learned to decipher its message. The morning arrived with a languid, somber hue, characteristic of the aftermath of a night when the storm appears to relent only temporarily. The first sensation upon stepping outside was the pervasive aroma, damp earth, uprooted vegetation, and that sharp mineralistic scent indicating the ground had endured significant duress. Red Willow Creek was considerably swollen, but not in a chaotic manner, not with the ferocity it could exhibit. It was full, agitated, pressing against its confines, but it had not overflowed, at least not on my acreage. The current, however, was swifter than I found comfortable, moving with a heavy, surging momentum, carrying along branches, sodden root systems, and fragments of vegetation that seemed out of place. Nevertheless, there was no overt indication of impending disaster, nothing that could account for the knot tightening in my stomach. I proceeded to the lower pasture to ensure everything was secure. The mud clung tenaciously to my boots, thick and chilling. With each few steps I paused and listened, attempting to reconcile the events of the preceding night. That profound boom had unsettled me more than I cared to admit. It possessed a palpable weight, a resonance felt deep within one's very being, and having lived long enough, I understood that such sounds do not originate from nothingness. Upon reaching the venerable spillway, a testament to my grandfather's craftsmanship from the 1950s, I knelt and traced my hand over the cool, damp stones. They remained firm and unyielding, as they always had. My grandfather built with an intent for permanence, for structures that would outlast any temporary disturbance. Even nature seemed to acknowledge its integrity. "No breach," I muttered to myself. "Not here." Yet, something upstream had undoubtedly undergone a transformation. I could sense it in the altered flow of the current. When you have observed the same watercourse follow its predictable path for your entire life, any deviation in its intention becomes readily apparent. I followed the northern trail that bordered the riverbank, consciously staying on higher ground. The pasture fencing remained intact. The cattle, displaying their characteristic intelligence, had ascended to the higher elevations of the ridge. My loyal border collie Juniper remained close to my heels, her ears alert, her nose twitching to decipher the scents carried on the humid air. "Yes," I conveyed to her silently, "I perceive it as well." A swollen creek emits a specific pitch, akin to a voice under strain but not yet broken. However, on this particular morning, I detected subtle undertones, the faint sounds of minor collapses, the shifting of stones, the dislodging of unseen matter in the distance. The further I ventured, the more pronounced my disquiet grew. It wasn't fear, but rather a heightened state of awareness. There's a distinct difference, and individuals over the age of 50 can undoubtedly attest to its significance. By the time I reached the curve where the cottonwoods clustered densely, sunlight began to pierce the clouds in thin, diffused shafts. I could finally discern the water's color, a deep, muddy brown, laden with silt, as if the creek had eroded something it ought not to have disturbed. The storm itself had not been the cause of this peculiar turbidity. I had weathered more severe storms, more significant floods, and more challenging spring thaws. This was undeniably different. I continued along the curve a short distance further. It was then that I observed the first unambiguous sign. A section of the bank had significantly eroded. It wasn't on my property, but further upstream, closer to the ridge. While not extensive enough to account for the profound boom, it was sufficient to prompt contemplation on whether the land had begun to succumb long before the onset of the rain. I stood there, hands on my hips, contemplating the fractured earth, listening to the growl of Red Willow Creek at the base of the newly formed scar. "Something startled you," I whispered. Juniper responded with a single sharp bark, as if in agreement or as a subtle warning. I was not the sole observer of that creek's behavior, and deep within, a quiet certainty assured me that I was not the only one who had heard that midnight detonation. Despite these portents and the pervasive sense of unease, no direct evidence pointed towards my involvement. Nothing suggested that the storm would transmute into a personal crisis. Not yet, at least. I continued my trek until a light drizzle commenced, persistent enough to indicate that the day's precipitation was far from over. By the time I had returned to the house, my jacket was damp and my boots bore the considerable weight of the riverbank. I meticulously wiped them on the porch mat, cast one final glance towards the creek, and concluded that no further immediate action was feasible. Nature, in its own way, would complete its pronouncements before I had an opportunity to intervene. Inside, I prepared another pot of coffee, adding a modest splash of cream, a solitary indulgence I felt I had legitimately earned, and settled into my familiar armchair, listening to the creek's distant murmur. If only I had possessed any inkling of what was to come. While I sat there, savoring my coffee, the gentle patter of rain against the window pane my accompaniment. Downstream, the residents of Ridgewater Springs HOA were inadvertently preparing to place my name at the forefront of their list of culprits. They were submerged, quite literally, and someone was on the verge of deeming me the most convenient scapegoat in the valley. News circulates in peculiar ways in this region. It doesn't travel with haste, but rather permeates every corner simultaneously, like smoke seeping beneath every doorway. Therefore, it did not surprise me when, around late morning, my phone vibrated with a text message from old Tom Delaney. "Are you witnessing the events unfolding in Ridgewater?" I had not. My focus had been entirely occupied with tending to the land. However, the subsequent message sent a chill through me. "They're flooded, badly. People are saying it originated from your property." I deliberately placed my coffee mug down with measured slowness. Rumors do not intimidate me. They profoundly irritate me, particularly when they emanate from individuals who possess absolutely no fundamental understanding of water, land, or basic common sense. I stepped out onto the porch, gazing down the valley. The HOA was obscured from my vantage point by an abundance of cottonwoods, but I could discern the prevailing atmospheric conditions above it. Low-hanging, dark, and unsettled. The kind of sky that typically presages trouble. Tom then called me directly. No pleasantries, just his voice, strained and rough. "Daniel, it's an absolute disaster down here. Basements are inundated, roads are washed out. Folks are claiming the surge originated directly from your channel." "My channel?" I repeated, allowing the absurdity of the words to register. "Tom, that creek has occupied that exact course since your grandparents were in diapers. I don't possess a channel. I have a river that I do not own." Tom sighed heavily, conveying a palpable sense of displeasure at being tasked with delivering this news. I comprehend, but Karen is actively inciting people. She's asserting that your land rerouted the water flow." That statement elicited a spontaneous laugh from me, a sharp exhalation of sheer incredulity. "Karen?" I said. "The very same Karen who believes coyotes can be effectively deterred with peppermint oil. That woman lacks sufficient knowledge of hydrology to fill a teaspoon." Tom offered no rebuttal, which served as a stark indication of the situation's gravity. "Look," he implored, "I'm merely extending a warning. People are frightened, and frightened individuals tend to assign blame." I ended the call and remained standing on the porch for a considerable duration. The creek was not visible, but its amplified sound reached me, far louder than it ought to have been. Angry, swollen, contending with debris as if it were a creature struggling for liberation. Somewhere between that resonant sound and Tom's pronouncements, a subtle shift occurred within me. It wasn't panic, nor was it outright fear, but rather a tightening sensation, as if the very land itself were whispering, "Prepare yourself." Around midday, I finally drove down the county road towards Ridgewater Springs, not to engage in confrontation, but to observe the situation firsthand. The closer I approached, the more evident the devastation became. Water had encroached upon driveways, mud coated the sidewalks, and several of those ostentatious mailbox pillars were askew, leaning precariously like inebriated figures struggling for equilibrium. And then I saw her. Karen Winters, the president of the HOA, the self-appointed arbiter of all trivial matters, standing resolutely in the middle of the road, sporting rain boots that had clearly never encountered genuine mud. She was gesticulating animatedly, pointing towards the creek, then towards the neighborhood, and finally upstream, a gesture unequivocally directed at me. Even from my vehicle I could decipher her words. It came from there. There was a certain inflection in her voice, a readiness, and a confidence that sent a shiver down my spine. She did not project the demeanor of someone taken aback by a flood. Instead, she appeared as someone who had been anticipating an opportunity to assign blame. I did not alight from the truck, nor did I engage with her, nor even slow down sufficiently for her to attempt to summon me over. I simply took in the scene, executed a U-turn, and began the journey back home. Because in that precise moment, I understood two undeniable truths. The flood was not my doing. And Karen Winters was far from finished with me. Not by a considerable margin. By the following morning the clouds had dispersed, but the complications had certainly not abated. The sky was clear, washed clean, a pristine blue, the kind that often follows an extended period of inclement weather. It was too immaculate, too innocent to conceal the turmoil beneath. The creek, though still swollen, had calmed considerably, appearing exhausted from its recent exertion. I was engaged in repairing the latch on my eastern corral gate when an unfamiliar sound reached my ears, the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. Tires that evidently cost more than my entire monthly feed expenditure. I turned and observed a white Lexus gracefully ascending my driveway. Sunlight glinted off its chrome accents as if attempting to blind me. The vehicle appeared utterly incongruous in this setting. Far too polished, too gleaming, too delicate for a rural Wyoming ranch road. I could almost sense the urban environment clinging to it like an expensive perfume. The door opened with a subtle hiss, and a man emerged, seemingly allergic to any form of dust. He was clad in a gray suit, his hair impeccably slicked back, and his leather shoes appeared poised to sink 2 inches into the mud, should he dare to venture more than 5 steps from the driveway. He clutched a folder as if it contained classified intelligence, or, perhaps, as if he feared it might inflict a bite. "Mr. Hogard," he inquired, his voice smooth, polite, and as artificial as a poorly aged steak. "That would be me," I replied, wiping my hands on a nearby rag. "Are you lost, or merely indulging in a pastoral visit?" He offered no smile. "Sir, I am here on behalf of the Bridgewater Springs Homeowners Association." I exhaled slowly through my nose. "Well, that certainly explains the Lexus." He opened the leather folder with an air of profound reluctance. "I've been instructed to deliver a formal notice of claim." "Claim for what?" I inquired, though I harbored a strong suspicion based on the furtive glances he kept directing towards the creek. He presented me with a thick envelope and then instinctively stepped back as if it posed a potential explosive hazard. I tore it open with my thumb, extracted the enclosed documents, and the first element that caught my eye was the monetary sum prominently displayed in bold lettering, $20,800, payable to Ridgewater Springs HOA. A wave of laughter erupted from me. It wasn't a mere chuckle, nor a polite acknowledgement, but a deep, resonant laughter that echoed across the yard, startling the birds from the cottonwoods. "You people have utterly lost your collective minds," I declared. The man blinked, attempting to regain his composure. "This constitutes a formal request for settlement. The HOA holds you accountable for the recent flood damage, citing your failure to maintain contemporary water control structures along your riverfront property." "My riverfront property?" I repeated, folding the check in half. "Son, that river predates your entire neighborhood by centuries. I do not own it. I do not control it. And I most certainly do not dam it." He cleared his throat. The HOA has ascertained that the initial breach occurred along your property line. Consequently, you may be deemed liable under applicable riparian responsibility statutes. I interrupted him with a raised hand. Do you even possess a rudimentary understanding of what riparian law entails? He opened his mouth to respond. Do not, I interjected. I can quite clearly discern the answer from the condition of your footwear. He persisted, reading from a document. If you affix your signature to the enclosed release form and remit the specified payment within 15 business days, the HOA will refrain from pursuing further legal action. I regarded him for a prolonged moment. Allow me to ensure I comprehend your position correctly, I stated. Your HOA constructs residences within a known floodplain, constricts the natural watercourse, disregards official state water assessments, and is subsequently inundated by a flood that every existing map clearly predicted. And I am expected to rectify your oversight? He swallowed audibly. I am merely here to deliver these documents. No, I countered, stepping closer. You are here so that Karen Winters does not have to. She wishes to employ a sartorially sophisticated representative and a luxury vehicle to lend an air of officiality to her baseless accusation. He offered no denial, which served as confirmation of my suspicion. I folded the paperwork, placed it into the back pocket of my trousers, and adopted the wry smile my father used to reserve for salesmen who overestimated their own astuteness. Convey to your superior, I advised, that she will require a more compelling narrative than this. The man closed his folder, seemingly relieved to create a physical barrier between us. I shall report your response, he stated, choosing his words with calculated precision. By all means, do so, I replied. He re-entered the vehicle and promptly closed the door. A cloud of dust billowed around the tires as he reversed. One could practically hear the Lexus yearning for its return to paved surfaces. I watched him depart, leaving in his wake a faint trail of dust that hung in the air like a lingering insult. Once the receding engine sound had finally faded into silence, I returned to the porch and took a seat on the steps. I retrieved the envelope once more, turning it over in my hands. It still felt faintly warm from the man's grip. A check for $2.8 million, accompanied by a thinly veiled threat of legal proceedings, all because the creek had behaved in accordance with its natural tendencies. But I possessed a deeper understanding. This situation was not fundamentally about water, it was about assigning blame, and Karen Winters had singularly identified me as the most convenient individual in the valley upon whom to project it. She clearly underestimated me. One might reasonably assume that after delivering a bill for $2,800,000 to my doorstep, the HOA would grant me at least a day to recuperate, a day to contemplate, a day to regain my composure. However, Karen Winters operates on a different principle. She is propelled not by the rhythms of daylight or the tenets of decency, but by drama and the perceived authority of committee power. The very next morning, the local gossip had already outpaced the mail carrier. I visited the feed store to procure essential mineral blocks and a new pair of gloves. Typically, this establishment fosters a convivial atmosphere. Elderly gentlemen leaning against sacks of grain, individuals exchanging weather forecasts. A place where a simple nod of acknowledgement is extended even on one's most trying days. But on this particular morning, the ambiance felt palpably altered. Greetings were still offered, but eye contact was notably avoided. Several hushed conversations ceased abruptly as I passed, and then I understood the reason. A stack of the Valley Ledger lay prominently on the counter, its front page turned upwards. Positioned directly beneath a report on a 4-H club picnic was a headline that caused my jaw to tighten involuntarily. Negligence upstream. Local landowner may have worsened flood impact. The accompanying caption stated, HOA says, followed by a photograph of the submerged Ridgewater sign, partially obscured by water, rendered with a dramatic flair that seemed designed to elicit a tighter grip on coffee cups. I retrieved the newspaper, scanned its contents, and felt my internal temperature begin to rise. Karen Winters had penned an entire column. 3 paragraphs of meticulously crafted, lawyerly prose, laden with what she perceived as irrefutable assertions. According to her, I had neglected to modernize the waterway. My outdated land management practices had allegedly contributed to uncontrolled runoff. I had, she claimed, disregarded decades of hydrological best practices, and her most audacious pronouncement, I had demonstrated a long-standing disregard for community safety. Disregard me. The only entities I have consistently disregarded for decades are HOA politics and overpriced landscaping trends. However, the aspect that truly stung was the speed with which she had preempted the truth. She had spoken first, and in these small communities, where rumors possess a far longer lifespan than factual accounts, being the first to voice an opinion carries significant weight. I carefully refolded the paper, a gesture reserved for moments when one is sufficiently provoked to tear it asunder. The young man at the register, approximately 18 years of age, appeared nervous and well-intentioned, as if he felt compelled to offer an apology on behalf of the entire town. "Don't concern yourself," I assured him. "I've been subjected to more unfavorable assessments from individuals of superior standing." He offered a weak smile, and I proceeded back to my truck, the newspaper's headline replaying in my mind like a restless horse trapped in a corral. On my return journey, I stopped at a gas station for diesel fuel. A woman I had known for 2 decades offered a tight-lipped smile, the kind that conveys a hope that a rumor is untrue, yet lacks the courage to voice that sentiment aloud. "Are you holding up all right, Daniel?" she inquired. "I'm managing," I replied, which was only partially inaccurate. She hesitated. "People are talking." "Indeed," I responded. "That's precisely how people operate." Upon finally pulling into my driveway, Juniper greeted me with a single bark and a wagging tail, blissfully unaffected by the complexities of human affairs. I scratched her behind the ears and directed my gaze towards the porch. It was then that I noticed it. Someone had placed a copy of the Valley Ledger on my door, but it wasn't merely the newspaper. A section of Karen's column had been encircled in red ink, reminiscent of a teacher grading an assignment. And beneath it, scrawled in a shaky hand, were the words, "Explain yourself." There was no signature, and evidently no courage. I stood there for a considerable minute, the paper rustling in the wind, the creek murmuring in the background, as if sharing a jest, understood only by itself. Explain myself. Certainly, I would explain myself when addressing an individual of genuine consequence, not in response to a newspaper hiding behind the whispers of HOA pronouncements. I would never seek refuge in a town where rumor readily eclipses sound judgment, and certainly not with Karen Winters, the kind of writer who likely crafts her columns with a glass of wine and her feet soaking in a luxurious bath. No, if they desired the unvarnished truth, they would receive it, but on my terms. Not through whispers, not through articles, and definitely not from some HOA stooge like Alexis. By the time the sun descended behind the mountains that evening, I'd had my fill of speculation, correction marks in stark red, and Karen Winters' fanciful notions splashed across a newspaper for all to witness. A man can only endure so much while being painted as the antagonist in a narrative he never even knew he was part of. So I retreated indoors, poured myself a glass of water, and did precisely what I should have done the moment that Lexus pulled into my driveway. I placed a call to Grant Lockage. Grant is no typical lawyer. He's unpretentious, far from polished, and his suits, if he owns any, are testament to their ill fit. What he possesses, however, is a mind so astute it could strip the very paint from a courthouse, coupled with the temperament of a man who once debated a judge on the precise definition of reasonable volume when it came to a rooster's crow. We share a long history. 5 years prior, when the Ridgewater Homeowners Association attempted to prohibit me from operating my tractor before 7 in the morning, citing the disruptive noise of machinery on community well-being, Grant merely glanced at their formal complaint and erupted in laughter so heartily that his coffee nearly spilled. 2 months later, he dismantled their case in court with such devastating thoroughness that even the court stenographer struggled to suppress a grin. Thus, when he answered the phone with his customary gruff greeting, "Lockage Law Office, securing your liberty since '94," The tension in my shoulders eased discernibly. "It's Daniel," I stated. He paused. "In jail?" "No." "Someone deceased?" "Not yet." He sighed. "All right. What has the HOA concocted this time?" I recounted every detail. The Lexus, their demand of $2.8 million, the newspaper piece, the red-inked message, and the rumors swirling like miniature cyclones across the entire valley. After I concluded, a brief silence permeated the line. Then Grant exhaled slowly, the kind of exhalation men make when confronted with something so preposterous it scrambles their cognitive functions. "Daniel," he began, his voice laced with genuine concern, "I say this with the utmost affection. Your HOA neighbors are utter fools." "That's remarkably generous," I replied. "I'm merely employing decorum. Would you prefer the impolite assessment?" "No," I said. "I endure sufficient quantities of that from my livestock." I could almost sense him rubbing his forehead. "Very well. Let's address the immediate concerns. Under no circumstances do you remit a single cent. Riparian law operates on established principles, not arbitrary demands. They cannot hold you accountable for water that does not rightfully belong to you." That's precisely what I conveyed to them. Indeed, but they tend to disregard reason and respond only to influence, and in this instance, that influence is Karen. He wasn't mistaken. Grant cleared his throat. "Forward me the photographs, the documentation, and that ludicrous article, and that check. Heavens preserve me, I want to frame that monstrosity." "Would you like it now?" I inquired. "Yesterday would have been preferable," he retorted. I swiftly gathered the envelope, captured the necessary images, and transmitted everything. Moments later, my phone chimed. Grant. Good heavens, they actually committed this to paper, in English, and dispatched it to another sentient human being. Unfortunately, that human being was me. All right, here's the strategy. His tone shifted, adopting that precise, almost surgical cadence he reserves for situations where he senses an opportunity. I'm initiating an information request with the Wyoming Department of Water Resources first thing tomorrow. They will confirm state ownership of the creek, but I'm also seeking floodplain maps, historical bank conditions, and any modifications enacted within the past decade. That will take weeks, I observed. 3 days, Grant countered. I have an acquaintance who owes me a substantial favor. The manner in which he emphasized favor made me ponder if this acquaintance's debt was one of gratitude or fear. And Daniel, he added, his voice dropping conspiratorially, begin contemplating anything at all that seemed peculiar prior to the flood, any unusual sounds, activity, machinery, anything that struck you as out of the ordinary. I hesitated. Well, there was a rather distinct boom. Silence ensued on the line for a solid 3 seconds. What sort of boom? He pressed. The kind that causes windows to vibrate. Grant seldom swore, but he did so then. Daniel, he said, his voice slow and deliberate, if that wasn't thunder, you might be confronting a predicament significantly graver than mere negligence. I leaned back in my chair, gazing out at the creek, its surface shimmering like silver beneath the ascendant moon. What are you suggesting, Grant? I'm suggesting, he replied, that this flood did not simply befall Ridgewater. It's conceivable that someone facilitated its occurrence. The line fell silent once more. Not an awkward silence, but rather the profound quietude that descends when two individuals realize the narrative they are involved in has just escalated dramatically. I'll be there tomorrow, Grant finally stated. Remain where you are. Do not engage with anyone. And for the love of all that is holy, do not speak with Karen. The very thought is abhorrent, I assured him. Yet, truthfully, if Karen Winters had materialized at my doorstep at that precise moment, I couldn't guarantee I would have honored that promise. Grant arrived the following morning in his weathered green Tacoma, a stark contrast to the ostentatious Lexus that had disturbed the tranquility of my driveway 2 days prior. His truck bore marks of character, dense in locations that required no elaborate explanation, and a coffee mug permanently lodged between the windshield and dashboard, likely held in place by sheer tenacity. He disembarked, stretched his back with the deliberate grace of a man rehearsing his own demise, and presented me with a crumpled paper bag. "Breakfast burrito," he announced. "Consume it promptly before it transitions from sustenance to potential exhibit." Grant's arrivals were never unburdened, nor ever without a well-defined strategy. We settled at my time-worn kitchen table, its oak surface scarred with the patina of decades, a surface older than both of us. He then unfurled a collection of printed documents, maps, and 2 thumb drives. "This," he declared, tapping the uppermost paper, "is where the HOA's narrative unravels with such rapidity that it generates its own atmospheric disturbance." He slid a copy of the official floodplain map issued by the state across the table. I had encountered it previously. Broad, somber, gray outlines delineating natural overflow zones that predated the very existence of Ridgewater Springs with its ornamental koi ponds and contemplative pathways. But then Grant placed another map beside it. The identical geographical area, the same scale, yet the floodplain's configuration was distorted, almost diminished. "What exactly am I observing?" I inquired. "A forgery," he stated bluntly. "Or, at the very least, an altered rendition. This is the map the HOA submitted with their most recent building expansion permit." I scrutinized the doctored map. They had effectively shaved off nearly 30 yards of designated floodplain land, meticulously marked by the state as high-risk territory. "The state wouldn't have sanctioned that," I murmured. "They never saw it," Grant confirmed. He retrieved a flash drive and inserted it into my laptop, an antiquated machine that wheezed like an asthmatic horse but still sprang to life. He accessed a compilation of documents obtained through his extraordinary favor, the nature of which I still preferred not to probe. "Observe this," he instructed, pointing. 7 months ago, Ridgewater submitted a variance request seeking authorization to undertake renovations on their lower bank. According to state records, the request was flagged for technical review. Understood. Subsequently, it vanished. I blinked. Vanished? As in, it existed one moment and the next, the system indicated no trace of its upload, not even a corrupted file. Nothing. You're suggesting someone deliberately removed it. Someone possessing administrative privileges, he corrected. Someone who had no desire for the county to scrutinize too closely what Ridgewater was doing to the natural embankment. I leaned back, the wooden chair groaning in protest beneath my weight. In Wyoming, documents do not simply dematerialize from governmental databases, largely because the individuals managing them can scarcely delete emails. This was no accidental occurrence. Grant slid another document across the table. "This is a topographical comparison," he explained. "Last season versus this season." The 2 lines representing the riverbank's natural curvature failed to align. One was broad and gently sloping, the other funneled inward as if an immense bulldozer had scraped away the bank. "Do you perceive that constriction?" I asked. "I do," I replied, "and I find it profoundly concerning." "Narrowing a river channel amplifies flow velocity," Grant elaborated. "In a flood scenario, it transforms the creek into a pressurized conduit directed precisely at the lowest elevation in the valley." "And the lowest elevation," I concluded, completing his thought, "is Ridgewater Springs." He nodded. "Precisely, however, rather than admitting they constructed dwellings within a natural basin, they are attempting to assert that you accelerated the water's flow and intensity." I scoffed. "By engaging in what? Ranching?" "Karen's logic," Grant interjected, "has never operated within the confines of conventional reality." He retrieved another document. Construction invoices, drainage schematics, landscaping proposals, all bearing the HOA's name. One entry seized my attention. "Bank reinforcement project deferred. Budget reallocated." "Reallocated to what?" I inquired. Grant flipped to the subsequent page, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "To this Eastgate Beautification Initiative." I stared at him. They abandoned flood protection measures to acquire flower beds and decorative lighting. Jesus Christ, he confirmed. I wish I were jesting. The deeper we delved, the more disturbing the revelations became. Grant unearthed reports detailing erosion that the HOA had systematically withheld from the county. He discovered electronic communications between board members discussing cost-saving measures by eschewing necessary hydrological assessments. He even found a handwritten note from Karen herself, lamenting that stringent reinforcement measures detracted from the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal. Grant, I stated slowly, this paints a rather grim picture. This is merely the prelude, he countered. The true darkness awaits in what I am about to reveal. He opened a scanned document, its resolution grainy but legible. It was an internal HOA memorandum, and emblazoned directly in the center of the page, underlined twice, was a sentence that caused a palpable tightening in my chest. Should a significant water event transpire, we must immediately establish upstream negligence to safeguard Ridgewater's liability position. Upstream negligence immediately, Grant emphasized, tapping the screen. They were meticulously planning the scapegoat strategy even before the storm's onset. Planning it? I repeated, my voice dropping to a low register. Indeed, and thus far, their execution is precisely on schedule. I glanced out the window at Red Willow Creek, now deceptively placid, flowing as if no disruption had occurred. Yet I could sense a profound shift within me, a weight, an ancient instinct, something my father used to refer to as the line, the point at which one ceases to grant the benefit of the doubt and instead embarks upon the path of defiance. Grant gently closed the laptop. This is no longer a narrative about a flood, he declared. This is a cover-up. And for the first time since that earth-shattering boom had reverberated through my home, I believed him implicitly. By the time Grant gathered his documents, my coffee had long since turned stone cold. The sheer magnitude of the evidence he had presented, the fabricated maps, the expunged records, the constricted riverbank, settled upon my chest with the oppressive weight of sodden sand. Ridgewater's predicament was not a natural anomaly. Someone had employed a shovel, a bulldozer, or perhaps a misguided notion, and engineered a catastrophe. Grant stood, rubbed the back of his neck, and announced, "There remains one additional individual we must consult." "And who might that be?" I inquired. He produced a well-worn business card from his jacket. Its corners were dog-eared, the ink slightly faded, suggesting it had resided in his wallet for an extended period. Eleanor Ward, P.E., hydraulic engineer, consultant. She was the one who cautioned Ridgewater that their bank modifications were inherently perilous, Grant explained. Karen summarily buried her report, terminated Elena's contract, and presumably hoped her concerns would be permanently forgotten. "And you believe she will speak with us?" Grant retrieved his coat. "Daniel, she has been anticipating precisely this opportunity for someone to engage with her." We drove into town and entered the venerable Brick County building, an establishment showing its age, with floors burnished to a sheen and walls that still retained a faint aroma of chalk dust. A clerk directed us down a hallway toward a modest office. Within, a woman sat intently absorbed in maps and handwritten notes. She looked up as we entered, her gaze sharp, her posture weary, as if she had been engaged in a silent, solitary battle. "Miss Ward?" Grant inquired. "Yes," she responded, her voice betraying no surprise. "And I presume you are here regarding Ridgewater?" Her tone lacked apprehension. Instead, it conveyed a palpable sense of relief. Grant introduced us, and without preamble, he articulated the core of our inquiry. "We are aware that the HOA suppressed your report," he stated. A faint, almost bitter smile touched the corner of her lips. Naturally they did. She gestured us inside. Her office was compact but meticulously organized. Maps adorned the walls, folders were clearly labeled by date, and a whiteboard was densely covered in arrows, lines, and precise measurements. Eleanor retrieved a binder from beneath a pile and opened it on the desk. "This is the assessment they were determined to keep from public view." I leaned closer. The initial page displayed a photograph of Ridgewater's lower bank, featuring stone edging, decorative retaining blocks, and a constricted bend where the creek attempted a natural meander. That narrowing significantly increases water velocity, she explained, indicating the diagram with a tap. It appears aesthetically pleasing in a brochure, but it's catastrophic in reality. That bank was not merely vulnerable, it was deliberately primed for failure. She turned another page. This one depicted disturbed earth and a freshly dug trench. And this, she stated, represents their attempt to construct a diversion channel. I stared at it. Did they possess a permit for that? She met my gaze directly. They lacked even basic common sense. Grant leaned over her shoulder. Did you warn them? On 3 separate occasions, she confirmed. In writing, verbally, and in the final report I submitted. Karen informed me that my recommendations lacked vision and were prohibitively expensive. 2 days later, my contract was terminated. I felt a surge of heat rising in my chest. What about the night preceding the flood? I asked. Did you detect any unusual sounds? Anything loud? Out of place? Elena's expression shifted, a flicker of memory replacing her professional demeanor. Yes, she replied softly. I heard it. She looked from Grant to me. It wasn't thunder. I waited. It was metal, she divulged, striking rock. Something heavy, perhaps machinery, impacting an already compromised bank. A single impact, perhaps two, sufficient to create a sound akin to a fissure opening in the earth. My breath hitched. Grant remained motionless. You believe someone deliberately damaged the bank? He inquired. Elena did not hesitate. If someone had excavated deeply beneath the undercut soil, it would require minimal effort. A small amount of applied pressure, a bit of leverage, a precisely aimed strike, and the storm would perform the rest. She tapped the final page of her report, the very report Karen had commissioned, and subsequently paid her to forget. This flood was not an unforeseen event, she stated definitively. It was accurately predicted, and Ridgewater didn't merely disregard the inherent risks, they actively amplified them. She leaned back, rubbing her forehead. If you seek the unvarnished truth, they were consumed by the fear of diminishing property values. Floodplain compliance would have necessitated limitations on development, structural reinforcement of the bank, and the abandonment of numerous beautification projects. Consequently, Karen opted for superficial appearances over fundamental safety. Did she have knowledge of the potential consequences? I questioned. She actively avoided acquiring that knowledge, Elena replied, and when an individual consciously chooses ignorance, they become extraordinarily adept at deception. Grant carefully closed the binder, handling it as if it were a volatile device that required utmost caution. Elena, he said, his voice measured, we require your assistance. We are presently engaged in litigation. They are attributing responsibility for the flood to Daniel. Her laughter was dry and devoid of amusement. Karen is attempting to deflect blame onto someone upstream to shield herself. She has been meticulously laying that groundwork for months. She rose and walked to the wall, tapping the floodplain map pinned there. This, she declared, is the authentic map, the one utilized by the state. The HOA deliberately altered theirs. They excised 30 yards of floodplain and pretended it simply did not exist. And your report clearly identified that discrepancy, Grant affirmed. Precisely, she confirmed, which is the very reason they sought to suppress it. The room became quiet, not uncomfortably so, but with a profound gravity. I examined the lines on the map, the unnaturally sharp curve of the bank, the floodplain shaded broadly across the valley floor. So, Karen was not blindsided, I stated. She gambled, Elena concurred, and when the wager did not yield the desired outcome, she added softly, she began searching for someone to hold accountable. She turned back to face us, folding her arms, her voice firm and resolute. I will assist you. Whatever is necessary, because this was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made catastrophe, and it is high time the truth was revealed. By the time Grant and I departed, neither of us felt inclined to speak, not due to any disagreement between us, but rather because we had witnessed something that could not be unseen. The road back to the ranch was partially washed out and softened by the recent storm. My truck slid precariously in the ruts, the sky a picture of deceptive calm considering the oppressive weight of the atmosphere. As we disembarked, Grant gestured towards the northern pasture. "Where is that trail camera of yours?" "Back near the cottonwoods," I replied. "It overlooks the bend in the creek. Let's retrieve it." We ascended the incline, Juniper trailing behind, her nose to the ground, her tail drooping, an old dog invariably sensing when something was amiss. She offered no bark, merely staying close. Reaching the cottonwood, I unclipped the camera, removed the SD card, and handed it to Grant. He turned it over in his fingers. Time to see what the creek witnessed. Back inside, we settled at the kitchen table. I poured us both coffee, not out of a need for caffeine, but because a warm mug provides a comforting anchor when the very ground beneath you feels unstable. Grant inserted the card into his laptop, the folder loaded with agonizing slowness, as if even the computer hesitated to display its contents. "Proceed," I urged. He clicked on the initial video file from the night of the storm. Nothing but rain, thick sheets driven horizontally, the creek was a raging torrent, branches snapping downstream, the world a watery blur. Clip after clip played. More rain, more wind. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then Grant stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Hold on." He scrolled back one file and initiated playback. The timestamp immediately caught my attention. 11:52 p.m., the night before the flood. The camera's illumination revealed a scene of grainy darkness. Rain hammered against the lens. Yet even through the deluge, movement was discernible. Shapes. 3 figures, their forms obscured by hooded rain ponchos, crouched near the creek bank. They were low, their actions deliberate, clearly not hunters, not casual passers-by, not anyone with legitimate business in that location. Grant zoomed in. One figure knelt in the mud precisely at the narrowed section of the bank. The second figure raised a long, heavy object. The third maintained a watchful posture, glancing uphill toward my property as if fearful of being discovered. "What in God's name?" I whispered. Grant offered no immediate reply. He advanced to the next frame. A flash of lightning momentarily illuminated the darkness, and for a fleeting instant, the implement in the second man's grasp became crystal clear. A post-hole digger, a substantial one, the kind designed to penetrate compacted soil or weaken a riverbank. Grant's voice dropped to a low, steady monotone. "Daniel, they were digging." I remained immobile, scarcely breathing. We watched their methodical work, the hammering, the prying, the forceful removal of sodden earth from beneath the bank. The rain proved advantageous, softening the ground. They operated with swift efficiency, like men accustomed to such tasks. And then, the camera captured it. A sharp, forceful impact. A deep, resonant thud that vibrated even through the microphone. Boom. My chest constricted. I recognized that sound. That was the sound that had rattled my windows that fateful night. The very sound I tried to dismiss as thunder, despite never truly believing it. The 3 figures recoiled, startled. The bank slumped a few inches. Water surged into the cavity they had meticulously carved. Then they dispersed. Grant leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the screen. "There's your boom." My throat felt constricted. "Grant, who would orchestrate such a thing?" He remained silent. Instead, he opened the subsequent clip. A pair of dim headlights appeared on the ridge. Not bright. The vehicle's lights had been intentionally dimmed. The vehicle parked partially off the county road. After a moment, a figure emerged. An umbrella, a long coat, stood perfectly still, surveying the creek below where the 3 men had been working. Even through the grainy pixels and the distortion caused by the rain, the posture was unmistakable. The crossed arms, the stance, the head tilted as if inspecting property boundaries. Karen Winters, observing, supervising, ensuring the task was executed to her specifications. My jaw locked so tightly it ached. Grant remained silent for a considerable duration. There was no need for words. We watched the final seconds of the video. The creek churned violently. The rain beat down relentlessly. Karen remained stationary. Eventually she turned, walked back to the car, and drove away. The screen faded to black. I felt a profound sensation stir within my chest. Not fear, not shock, but that deep-seated, simmering anger that rural folk rarely encounter but never forget once it is ignited. So that is the extent of it. They deliberately eroded the retaining wall on my property boundary, ensuring the water pressure would breach it precisely there. Then they simply waited for the storm to complete their destructive work. Grant agreed, stating they weaponized the creek and then attempted to pin the blame on me. I walked back and forth across the kitchen, Juniper following close behind, her ears laid flat. They utilized my land to inflict the damage, I explained, my voice measured. Then they had the audacity to send me a bill for $2.8 million to cover the disaster they manufactured. Grant closed his laptop. This has moved beyond mere carelessness, Daniel. This is a calculated scheme, and they disseminated my name throughout the entire town. Indeed. And they initiated legal proceedings against me, yes. And they published falsehoods in the local newspaper, absolutely. I exhaled a breath that felt like it had been held captive within me for years. Grant, I declared, we will use this to dismantle them. He offered a single, decisive nod. Tomorrow, we present this to the community, to the governing body, to the court. This narrative is no longer theirs to control. I glanced towards the darkened window, where the creek murmured softly as if nothing had transpired. The river bore witness to it all, I said softly. Now, everyone else will too. Grant donned his coat. You're no longer contending with a troublesome homeowners association, Daniel, he advised. You are confronting a cover-up, and individuals who orchestrate cover-ups will not cease until they are compelled to. He stepped out into the darkness, and standing in my doorway, listening to the creek, I understood that the true confrontation was just commencing. By dawn, the entire valley felt tense, as if the very atmosphere was aware that something was imminent. I awoke before the sun, prepared a pot of coffee, and sat on the porch, listening to the creek. It was difficult to comprehend that the same placid water had been transformed into an instrument of destruction merely a couple of nights prior. Grant arrived shortly after daybreak. He bypassed the courtesy of knocking, proceeding directly to the back with a folder tucked under one arm and resolve in his demeanor. Are you prepared? He inquired. As much as I will ever be. Excellent, because the town council has convened an urgent session for midday. Karen is already pressing for a vote to proceed with the lawsuit. I slowly shook my head. She believes she has the entire town's backing. That will not be the case after today. We drove into town together. Residents lined the sidewalks, some out of curiosity, others whispering, and some deliberately averting their gaze. I was not taken aback. In small communities, people require little encouragement to congregate. Upon our arrival at the town hall, the parking lot was completely occupied. Pickup trucks, sedans, and a few of Bridgewater's ostentatious SUVs. And there, standing directly on the steps as if she owned the premises, was Karen Winters, her hair immaculate, a clipboard clutched to her chest, her eyes surveying the assembled crowd as if tallying her supporters. She spotted me, her shoulders stiffening. She whispered something to the HOA treasurer standing beside her, who responded with a nod as compliant as a trained animal. Grant nudged me. Allow her to savor her final moments of authority. Inside the council chamber, the space was filled to capacity, with folding chairs extending all the way to the rear. People stood along the walls, lingered in the doorway, and craned their necks from the hallway. It was the sort of gathering you witness when a significant event is on the verge of unfolding. I felt a tap on my arm. It was Tom Delaney, my acquaintance from Ridgewater. Are you managing all right, Daniel? He inquired softly. Ask me again in an hour. He offered a strained nod, his expression conveying a sense of guilt. Many individuals were quick to form judgments. They simply desire someone to hold accountable. Yes, I acknowledged. Well, they are about to find someone. The meeting commenced with the council chair clearing her throat and reading through the agenda. She then yielded the floor to Karen, who advanced with an air of triumph as if entering a courtroom she had already won. She launched into a meticulously crafted speech attributing the issue to negligence upstream, insufficient land management, and improper upkeep of natural defenses. She brandished charts, pointed her immaculately manicured fingernails at maps, and gestured dramatically with every mention of flood damage. The audience murmured. A few individuals nodded in agreement. She then held up the lawsuit documents as if they were a prize. "This community," she proclaimed, "cannot stand idly by while the negligence of one individual jeopardizes the security of our residences. We must act decisively." I could feel the blood surging in my ears. Grant leaned in and whispered, "Let her incriminate herself." When Karen concluded, she reveled in the attention, her chin held high, her lips pursed in that familiar smile she employs when she believes she has triumphed. The council chair then turned to Grant. "Mr. Lockage, you requested to present a response on behalf of Mr. Hogarth." Grant rose, buttoned his jacket, the one that never quite fit properly, and approached the front with the composure of a man carrying explosives but pretending they were groceries. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "everything you have just heard is missing a crucial element: the truth." This elicited a buzz throughout the room. He continued, "The HOA claims Daniel caused the flood by neglecting to maintain a waterway, but there is a minor issue with that assertion." He paused. "The waterway is not his responsibility." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Karen stiffened. Grant held up official documentation from the Department of Water Resources. "This is the state's classification for Red Willow Creek. It is a public watercourse. No private citizen, certainly not Mr. Hogarth, possesses the authority to alter it." He allowed that information to sink in, but the HOA remained unmoved. More murmurs arose. Grant clicked the projector remote. The lights dimmed. The footage from the trail camera filled the wall. The room fell into absolute silence. Rain, shadowy figures, metal tools digging into the embankment. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God!" Grant spoke softly, allowing the video to convey the message. These individuals were not intruders. They were not vandals. Their actions were not random. They were acting under directives. The footage advanced to the next segment, headlights on the ridge, and then the figure emerging. An umbrella, a long coat, standing perfectly still. The room collectively inhaled. Someone in the back actually exclaimed, "No way." Karen shot up from her seat. "That footage has been manipulated. This is an outrage." Grant raised a hand. "Sit down." And she did. Not out of compliance, but because the authority in his voice was an unexpected blow. Grant pointed at the screen. "That is your HOA president overseeing the deliberate weakening of a natural bank. A bank that Elena Ward, previously contracted by the same HOA, had explicitly advised them against disturbing." Elena stepped forward, and the crowd parted for her as if she were a flame. She placed her folder on the podium. "Everything in my report is accurate. The HOA altered a floodplain, removed natural vegetation, disregarded reinforcement guidelines, and attempted to conceal the risks. They terminated my employment when I refused to falsify the findings. Absolute stillness, not even the shuffling of feet." Grant folded his hands behind his back. "Daniel Hogarth did not cause your flood," he stated. "Your own leadership did." They then blamed the closest individual because falsehoods spread more rapidly than accountability. Karen attempted to stand one last time, but this time the treasurer beside her placed a hand on her arm, not gently. His face had turned ashen. A woman from the second row stood up. "Karen, is this true?" Silence. Karen's eyes darted around the room. She was no longer smiling. She was not standing tall. She appeared cornered, like a fox ensnared in its own trap. Grant stepped back from the microphone. "My client will not be paying $2.8 million, he stated. "And after today, I doubt this community will ever permit this lawsuit to proceed." The council chair swallowed, looking visibly shaken. This matter will be postponed, pending an investigation. Karen stormed out. People moved aside, not out of respect but out of avoidance, as if she were radiating contagion. Tom approached me afterward, his eyes wide. "Daniel, I apologize. We all owe you an apology." I shook his hand. "Just ensure the truth prevails." Outside, the wind intensified, whipping dust across the parking lot. Grant closed his folder and looked at me with that characteristic half-smirk. "Well," he remarked, "that was enjoyable." I inhaled deeply of the crisp Wyoming air. "Grant," I replied, "enjoyable is not the term I would employ." He shrugged. "It is when you win the initial round." And as we walked back to the truck, I knew one thing with certainty. Karen Winters was not finished, but neither were we. The repercussions from the town hall meeting did not wait for morning. They did not even wait for people to reach their homes. The instant Grant and I stepped into the parking lot, the atmosphere felt charged, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Karen had vanished. That alone told me she had not surrendered. Individuals like her do not retreat. They rearm. Grant opened the truck door and tossed the folder inside. "She is panicking," he stated. "That makes her dangerous." "No," I countered. "She has always been dangerous. Now she is simply careless." I was not mistaken. By the time I returned home, my phone was inundated with notifications. Missed calls, anonymous texts, voicemails from numbers I did not recognize, some supportive, some accusatory, some downright unpleasant. But the one message that resonated with me came from Tom. "The Ridge's board is in disarray. You might want to prepare yourself. She is not going down quietly." I did not sleep much that night. Neither did Juniper. She lay by the door, restless, her ears twitching at every gust of wind. Shortly after sunrise, I heard an SUV speeding up my driveway. Not Grant, not the sheriff. I stepped onto the porch just as Tom exited his truck. His hair was disheveled, his shirt half-buttoned, his eyes wide. "Daniel, she is calling an emergency HOA meeting." "So it's not a meeting, it's a purge," he explained. "She is attempting to consolidate power before the rest of the board revolts. She is twisting the footage, claiming it is fabricated, that Grant hired actors. She is spewing every falsehood she can grasp." "That does not surprise me." Tom shook his head more vigorously. "Daniel, she is threatening people?" I stared, the word threatening catching in my throat. "She informed one homeowner that if they do not support her, she will find grounds for unauthorized landscaping and have their mailbox removed." I blinked slowly. "Her mailbox? Why would she do that?" "She claims the HOA owns the mailboxes." I rubbed my temples. "I am quite confident the federal government would disagree." "You are not mistaken," Tom replied. "But people are afraid. When Karen feels cornered, she becomes inventive." I leaned against a porch post. "How severe is the situation?" "Half the board wants her removed. The other half is terrified of crossing her. I have never witnessed Ridgewater in such a state." I grabbed my coat. "Take me there." Tom raised a hand. "No, trust me. You do not want to walk into that." "Tom, I am serious." He insisted. "This is a family dispute now. Outsiders, even those she is targeting, should not set foot in the middle of it. Allow them to self-destruct." I did not like the idea, but he was not wrong. All I could do was listen. Inside Ridge's clubhouse, according to Tom, events rapidly deteriorated. Karen stormed in like a general marching into battle, her hair perfectly coiffed, her lips pursed, her eyes blazing with an intensity that could melt steel. She slammed a stack of papers onto the board table. "That footage is a smear campaign," she barked. "The entire town is being manipulated by a rancher with a grievance and a lawyer with an agenda." Someone inquired. "Karen, is that you in the video or not?" She slammed her fist on the table with enough force to make it rattle. It was dark. It could have been anyone. Anyone with your coat, your umbrella, your stature, your posture, one board member pressed. Karen pointed at him. "You are treading on thin ice, Randy." Another homeowner, an older woman wearing a floral sweater, stood up. "Karen, why was the embankment being dug at midnight?" Karen did not miss a beat. maintenance during the rain. We were addressing erosion at midnight. She snapped, "Do you desire solutions or excuses?" The room erupted. People talking over each other, half shouting, half whispering, half terrified, chairs scraping, papers flying, someone knocking over a water pitcher. And then, according to Tom, the moment that altered everything occurred. An elderly gentleman from the back row stood up. Someone who had resided in Ridgewater since the initial homes were constructed. "Karen," he stated, "my basement is filled with mud. My homeowner's insurance has denied my claim, and you are telling me he is responsible?" Karen nodded vigorously. Of course, the old man slammed his cane on the floor. "Lady," he declared, "if that rancher had intended to flood us, he would have done a cleaner job than your crew sneaking around at midnight." The room exploded. People shouting, people laughing nervously, some yelling, "She needs to resign," while others shouted, "This is slander." Karen stood frozen. For the first time in my acquaintance with her, she appeared diminished, but only for a second. Then something within her fractured. She pointed at the entire crowd, her eyes wild. "You are all sheep. Every last one of you. You believe that video proves anything? You believe that Cowboy has any respect for this community? He is a menace, a liar. He has been targeting me for years." Tom informed me that this was the moment when even her staunchest supporters distanced themselves from her. When Karen Winters loses her temper, she does not engage in debate. She detonates. The board attempted to calm her. Homeowners shouted back. One woman burst into tears. Someone called the sheriff. Another threatened to sue the HOA if Karen was not removed immediately. In the end, the emergency meeting did not conclude with a vote. It concluded with people abandoning her. Karen departed last, slamming the door behind her with such force that a framed HOA certificate tumbled from the wall. Later that afternoon, Tom returned to my ranch. He sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, breathing as if he had just outrun a tornado. "It is over for her," he stated. "Not yet," I responded. "Individuals like Karen do not depart with dignity. They depart fighting." Tom nodded grimly. "And she is fighting. I heard she has already contacted a private investigator and 2 lawyers. She is formulating a plan." Of course she was. People like Karen do not accept defeat. They reinvent themselves into a new avenue of attack. "What do you believe she will do next?" Tom inquired. I gazed out at the creek, quiet and steady once more, the way it always returns to its natural state. "She is running out of fabrications," I remarked. "So she will resort to spreading fear." Grant arrived in his Tacoma as I spoke. He stepped out carrying a new stack of documents. "She is filing counterclaims," he stated. "Multiple counts of defamation, interference, damages, and retaliation." Tom groaned. "That is preposterous," Grant smirked. "It is all so desperate." I crossed my arms. "So, this is now a civil war in Ridgewater," I observed. "Half desire her departure, half are uncertain what to believe. And Karen is out there igniting every fuse she can locate." Grant nodded. "This is the juncture," he explained, "where the truth ceases to be sufficient and we must begin to demonstrate intent." I looked at the creek again. The water flowed silently as if it remembered everything. Then, "Let us commence our work." The following morning felt colder than it ought to have. The storm had long since passed. The sun was up, but the air retained that sharp, metallic edge that presages trouble. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when Grant's truck rolled in, dust swirling behind him like a tail. He climbed out with an expression that I did not favor. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. "She has hired a private investigator," he announced before I even had a chance to ask. I set my mug down. "Who?" "A man named Lance Terrell, a former deputy from 2 counties over. He was terminated for, well, a list of reasons that became shorter once his colleagues revised the reports. Karen hired him last night." "And what is he supposed to uncover?" Grant shook his head. "It does not matter. Individuals like him do not discover the truth. They fabricate it." Juniper let out a low growl from the porch boards beside me. A wise dog. Grant leaned on the railing. "We are beyond the point of debating facts. Karen is attempting to overwhelm us with noise, So we require something she cannot suppress. We already possess the footage, I countered. He nodded. Footage demonstrates the action. We require something that demonstrates the intent. That word lingered in my mind. Intent. People can rationalize many things. Mistakes, accidents, poor judgment. But intent, that is where excuses cease to exist. Grant produced a folder. Tom gave me this last night. He did not wish to bring it to your residence himself, said it made him too uneasy. Inside the folder were screenshots, email logs, partial messages, some cut off mid-sentence, as if someone had hastily deleted them. Where did this originate? I inquired. The HOA treasurer's private cloud. Tom has access because she once requested his assistance with her printer. Do not inquire. I flipped through the pages. Most of the emails were mundane, budgets, landscaping proposals, maintenance complaints. But then one caught my eye. Subject, berm project delay from Karen Winters, time-stamped 3 weeks prior to the flood. It read, do not approve anything until after the elections. If the Lower Creek Bank fails, insurance will classify it as an act of God. No one will hold us responsible for water going where water naturally flows. I stared at the line until the words began to blur. Grant spoke softly. Keep reading. The subsequent email was from the treasurer, replying to Karen. But the engineers have indicated severe erosion. We are already past the safe window. If we do not reinforce, we risk property loss. Karen's response followed. Then property loss is a temporary inconvenience. Losing re-election is permanent. Delay it. Grant folded his arms. Intent. My stomach tightened. Grant, this is a smoking gun, he stated. But it did not end there. The next exchange was from the HOA's maintenance consultant, a man named Parker. The email was lengthy, filled with frustration and numerous warnings. He practically implored Karen to authorize emergency stabilization, and then her reply, a single sentence. Not now. Optics first. I set the papers down, exhaling slowly. She knew, I said. Better than knew, Grant replied. She calculated. We sat there for a considerable moment. A tractor hummed in the distance. A hawk cried somewhere above the ridge. Quiet, steady sounds that made the ugliness within those pages feel even more pronounced. Grant finally broke the silence. There is one more thing. He produced a flash drive. Tom mentioned that the treasurer secretly backed up everything before the last board meeting, including a folder Karen believed she had deleted. What is on it? Grant looked me directly in the eye. Draft letters. Drafts of what? He handed me the drive. Drafts Karen composed the day after the bank collapsed, he stated. Letters blaming you. Letters explaining why the neighborhood required a scapegoat. Letters outlining how to unify the community through a common adversary, her exact phrase. My jaw tightened. She planned the blame before the water had even reached their backyards. Grant nodded. That is the very definition of malicious intent. I leaned back against the porch post, allowing the weight of it to settle. Grant, this will be her undoing. He nodded again, slowly, with certainty. It will be, but it will not end with her. The board, the lawyers she has retained, the individuals who assisted in excavating that bank, they all must be held accountable. I looked out across my pasture. Juniper nudged my hand as if reminding me that the land was still mine, still steadfast, still worth defending. This, I declared, holding up the drive, goes to the judge. Grant offered a firm nod. And Daniel, he added, once this enters the court system, there is no turning back. I slid the flash drive into my coat pocket. Good, I replied, because I am exceedingly tired of turning back. Grant wasted no time. By sunrise the following morning, he was already pacing across the courthouse parking lot with a folder under his arm, and that particular expression he adopts when the truth is about to strike someone with the force of a falling anvil. I followed him into Judge Groves's chambers, a quiet, wood-paneled room, the sort of place where falsehoods do not resonate effectively. Karen was already present, seated rigidly beside her lawyer. She appeared worn, her eyes hollow, her posture tense, as if she had spent the entire night attempting to negotiate with fate. Her attorney kept whispering something to her, but she refused to look at anyone except the judge's desk, as if by staring at the wood grain she might be absolved. Grant slid the flash drive and printed emails across the table. "We have new evidence, Your Honor," he stated. Judge Groves raised an eyebrow. She already sensed this would not be a routine proceeding. She read the first email, then the second, then the exchange from the HOA treasurer, and then, very slowly, she picked up the draft letters. The room was utterly silent, save for the rustling of paper. I witnessed the precise instant it transpired, the very moment her demeanor shifted. She shifted back in her seat, exhaled a breath through her nostrils, and fixed her gaze directly upon Karen Winters. "Mrs. Winters," she stated, her voice as unwavering as chilled steel, "this matter has escalated beyond mere oversight." Karen's eyes widened. Her jaw quivered. Judge Groves rhythmically tapped a finger on the document before her. "This constitutes deliberate malfeasance. This is calculated deception. This is outright malice." Karen's legal counsel attempted an objection, but the judge paid him no mind. "The original claim," she continued, "is hereby dismissed with enduring finality." Grant offered a slight nod. I finally took a full breath, something I hadn't done in what felt like an eternity. Yet, the judge wasn't through. "I am forwarding these exhibits," she declared, "to the district attorney's office for their consideration of criminal charges. The public has a right to be informed when their faith has been betrayed." Karen's face became deathly pale. Her attorney leaned in, murmuring urgently, but she heard not a syllable. She simply stared ahead, as if the judge had just calmly informed her that the world had ceased to exist. Perhaps in her world it had. By nightfall, the repercussions had cascaded into Ridgewater like a second, devastating deluge. Board members tendered their resignations in rapid succession. Residents clamored for an emergency session to oust current leadership. The Homeowners Association's legal representative promptly resigned. Contractors began to emerge, admitting they too had voiced their concerns to Karen. I received a call from Tom around supper time. "They've removed her," he informed me. "A unanimous decision. All positions on the board are now vacant. HOA operations are temporarily suspended pending a comprehensive examination." "And Karen?" Tom hesitated. "The sheriff took her into custody 2 hours ago. Allegations include misappropriation of funds, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. More charges may follow." I stepped outside and gazed towards the creek. The water flowed serenely, placidly, as if it had anticipated this outcome all along. A week later, on a crisp morning, thick with the downy seeds of cottonwood trees, a knock sounded at my door. It was Mr. Mallister, the elderly gentleman who had once given me a stern look at the local feed store. In his hands, he held a mason jar filled with homemade peach preserves. He offered no elaborate apologies. People of his generation tend not to. They simply articulate what needs to be said. "We were deceived," he admitted, presenting me with the jar. Because at times, absolute conviction can overshadow the truth. I acknowledged his statement with a nod. "It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means she was an exceptionally convincing deceiver." He lowered his head. "Well, we know better now." He began to turn away, then paused. "Thank you for persisting." I watched him descend my front steps, moving with a slower pace than he had used to ascend them. Once the turmoil had finally subsided, Grant and I organized the gathering we had envisioned. It wasn't a party, nor a celebration, but rather akin to a collective sigh of relief for a town that had been holding its breath for far too long. We christened it the Creek Truth Gathering. Our neighbors arrived with folding chairs, slow cookers filled with dishes and guitars. Children chased each other, brandishing sticks as if herding imaginary livestock. Even the sheriff made an appearance, resting against the fender of his patrol car as if experiencing his first moment of leisure in a year. Just before dusk, Grant and I erected a wooden post near a curve in the creek. He held the sign steady while I secured it with nails. "Rivers don't lie. People do." This declaration wasn't for Karen's benefit. It was a message for everyone who had forgotten that water invariably finds its course and truth, sooner or later, surfaces. No amount of homeowners association paperwork can alter the immutable laws of nature or the principles of integrity. As the gathering began to disperse, I walked by myself to the edge of the creek. Red Willow Creek murmured softly over the stones, just as it always had, and just as it will continue to do long after I am gone. I placed my hand on an old fence post and looked at the fading amber line of the river. "I don't own this river," I said softly. But I made certain the truth wouldn't drown. And for the first time during a long and arduous season, the valley felt cleansed,